Good day, everyone, and welcome to Leadership Synergized, where we have a chance to talk to special people, individuals who come out and serve others and put value where it needs to be placed in our world as they work to expand and multiply leaders and positivity throughout our life and society. And I'm very pleased to bring back a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Randy Mills. Dr. Mills recently wrote a book about Larry Bird's high school days on the basketball court called As If by Magic. Dr. Mills, my friend, welcome back.
I always tell people that when you write a book, there's four parts to it. Trying to grab a hold of something and nail it down, doing the research, and then you start writing, which leads to more research and maybe even making big changes. And then there's the finding the publisher, and then there's the book sales, which is what I'm in now. But it's been going very well. It's always surprising to see who shows up and who doesn't show up when you do some of these local events, because I had many, as you know, basketball players from that era in the book. It just wasn't about Larry Bird and his high school basketball days. It was about all his competition and the people who helped him, including the people he played against that made him better. And so, yeah, I go to these places and I see people who probably have not done a whole lot of reading, who are just really excited about the book, which makes me happy, because not so much for the book sale, but just the fact that they're going to be really entertained and learn what a good story can do, I think, for them. Good crowds, new connections. Well, I wonder if things have changed so much, and it's not people that's changed, it's the systems and how they work now
Oh, sure.
with how the technology has changed. If our skill sets that made the workplace work and how we would make it better, if and I'm a little sad saying this, if maybe it no longer applies. I don't know, but
It may
that
not,
that
the thing we're saying, I think, right? It's just to the point of you. It's good fodder. It's great to talk about, but there's no legitimacy of use of time even trying to compare an era
yeah, true,
to
true.
another. It just
Yeah,
can't happen, right? There's no way to know because it kind of goes to, and I'm paraphrasing this, right? We can't go back to yesterday and start over, but we can start where we are today. Those
yeah,
starting points that everybody in life has today, whether they're leaders, whether they're stars on an athletic field or court, they're starting from a different spot than where a Larry Bird started from, where a Magic Johnson started from, where people like you and I or others in education and in leadership started from. It's just a different place. It's not better, it's not worse. It's just different. But to your point, it's really neat today. I'll go to the game of baseball. The golden age of baseball to me was the 1950, 1960 era. And today, here we are again. We've got two organizations that just are separated financially, and then there's everybody else trying to figure out how they get there. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it's just the system of the game, and everybody
yeah.
starts from a different point today.
Well, hopefully, with the Larry Bird book, which is really a celebration of that golden age of not only how basketball was played, but just that world of how you made it out in the world, and how people like Larry Bird, who came out of poverty, could inspire you with hard work
Yeah.
and be an example of how to get there, and stayed humble too. I mean, he's an amazing person in many ways. So he's very shy, I think, and still not available much to the public. And I discovered that when I was doing my own writing. But in some ways, it was better for me to, I think, keep my distance, because it allowed me not to be caught up in the present, what developed as a narrative. I was able to, I think, to reshape the narrative if people
Yeah.
want to read those books. And I ran into that a little bit when people didn't like some of the things I pointed out and found. But to me, it just makes Larry a more human, amazing person. And it also reminds me of how we, at that time, I hope this is still the same, we depended on other people, and those people were out there to help us. I mean, thank
And
God for that. They were really real blessings, and I had them. And even in basketball, I did a memoir about my time playing basketball in Southern Illinois at a little tiny high school of a little more than 100 people, single class basketball my senior year. We had the second longest winning streak in the state and got knocked out of the pretty early in the state tournament by Doug Collins' team. So nothing shabby about losing to a Doug Collins team.
Not at
But
all.
it changed my life. Basketball, I was touched by good coaches. I was made to feel worthy. I was given lessons, some of them which I failed at, and then I was lifted up and given a chance to do more and praised when I overcame it, or okay, you're doing the best you can. That's okay too. But not everybody has those kinds of coaches in the community and so forth. But it was a good time to be a male growing up in those small schools to have those opportunities. Of course, I mentioned something that's better in the future now, and that women and
Yeah.
girls being able to participate in sports fully as they should have been back then. That wasn't the case then. So there were many, many, many negative things about the world at that
Oh,
time that
to
we
your point, you're exactly right. And all things considered, for me, I find it much more interesting and exciting to watch women's basketball today than I do men's many time in that aspect. And kudos to the pioneers who brought that game, into our high school world and expanded it at the college level from the 60s, 1970s forward in that setting. But we're talking with Dr. Randy Mills, the author of a book named As If by Magic. Just a bit of the Larry Bird story, in particular from his high school days. And we've been spending a lot of time together here talking about Larry and a bit about how society has changed and leadership. But, Dr. Mills, your book launched in 2024, late fall, and you've been out there doing a lot of book signings. Tell us about an aha that through your book signings and the public, and you recently completed a podcast from the Rocky Mountain a geographical area, and I know you've been doing a lot in the state of Indiana as well. But what's something that jumped out as an aha that as you reflected on when you first heard it, man, I could have put that in my book if I had really reflected or had this conversation beforehand. Has there been a moment?
yes, many, many, many stories about Larry and people's interaction with Larry or being there and seeing Larry do something. Um, I've really thought about writing a book called Everybody Has a Larry Bird Story because I would be somewhere and at these book signings, hey, I got a Larry Bird story, nothing jumps to mind right now. It's too early in the morning,
That was
but
an unfair question.
yeah, but if I could go back and at one time I was scribbling some of those down, and many of them in the book. I don't think there were any big ones that I missed a really important thing. There were probably two or three that would have supported uh, in a stronger way some of the points that I found that were new that people had missed. Um, it's interesting to me how some people I did not get to interview who I contacted, and later on I saw them at book signings and so forth, and it was great meeting them, and it was always good. And then I would hear the stories that I missed, but that whole thing was interesting to me. Did you know that there are two people out now that have contacted me and all the people that I contacted that are writing books about Larry Bird?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one's on the West Coast, and that author has written two best-selling authors about basketball NBA players, and I was contacted by them. And then there's another guy that did not contact me, but everybody that I contacted says, "Hey, this guy's contacting me. He's doing a book about Larry Bird." I was going to do a book about Larry Bird's college days. Nobody's really done a book like just that last
Mhm.
getting up to the Magic thing, but his how he got there in that red shirt season and his sophomore, junior, and senior year, fascinating stories, much like the Larry Bird high school days of,
Mhm.
of how he got there. But you know, I I'm glad I got the high school in before anybody else caught it, and I'm very happy to do that. I don't want to compete anymore. Uh,
Well,
I've done several books, and one of the keys to my writing is the stories that I choose are stories that nobody's looked at very closely, and that's a good field to plow and to try to get to grow something for you because it's all fresh and new, and you don't have to worry about experts where there are other books out and the experts will come in and they'll come after you.
yeah.
So that's one reason why when I saw, well, there's some people going to be doing this. Okay, I'll go. I've got a lot of things that I want to write about, and I can easily shift to that.
So, Dr. Mills, where do you think the interest is rekindling at on Larry Bird? This is,
Um,
this is a guy that hasn't played basketball in what, 32, 33 years now.
well, that was open to me when the one person that I did talk to said, well, it's been 20 years. So it's that 20-year cycle of, okay, people have forgotten the other books.
Mm,
And those other books were interesting too in my writing. And this made it a very fruitful field to plow and try to grow something from. Uh, the initial books, when people started going back to Larry's home and trying to get to Larry and talk to people. This would have been in what, 85, 86 when they started coming out. Larry put a clamp on that. He went to the people that were going to be interviewed and he said, I don't want anything told about my family. He was very personal about it, very difficult life that he went through. And so when that got shut down, the high school stories got shut down. So that's what made the high school stories such a rich field
mm.
to work in because I found all these stories. I corrected a number of things that got repeated in all these books that came out in the 80s and 90s about Larry. So again, that was interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see what these are younger people, uh, if they understand the nuances that I understood because I came from that era, and so I could
Yeah.
ask more questions. I could see, okay, there's more behind this, and keep picking at it and getting a little deeper into the story.
You bring up a very valid point in that piece, and having come from that era, right? You watched the Willis Reed return, in the NBA Finals. That Walt Frazier and Dave DeBusschere. You mentioned Dave Collins, um, um, in that, or Doug Collins, I mean, in that regard. And now his son Chris is coaching at Northwestern, and being able to link those eras together, right? Because when the Celtics near the back of the 1970s, I mentioned earlier, I think they won something like 22, 23 games a year before Larry came in.
That was the
Yeah,
biggest turnaround in
yeah.
NBA
And,
history.
they had dropped off, but it was just a few years earlier. They had won like what you 9 or 10 world championships, in the 60s and 70s under Bill Russell and Bob Cousy. And they had been at the top of the game, so to speak. And that was even during an era where the Fort Wayne, Indiana had an NBA team, Fort Wayne Pistons, before they moved to, and St. Louis had the Hawks
The
in
Hawks.
that piece, in that setting. So, it's very interesting because one of the things you and I talked a little bit ago or earlier in our conversation, when you lose the focus on body of work, sometimes you lose the connectivity to the legacy. And the legacy can be seen in an individual, but when you look at what we're talking about with Larry and Magic, and you link back to what was Jerry West and Elgin Baylor and Gail Goodrich and Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell and Bob Cousy and others, the legacy really is a link to those that were before. And when you
Yes,
think about the loss of respect and appreciation for a body of work, we're really saying you're cutting off that legacy link of people and things that we valued previously if you're not careful and cautious in that regard.
that's the importance of history, Kevin. That's why I've always enjoyed teaching history, no matter what the subject, that you got to connect the dots. You've got to see what's going on. When I used to teach world history classes, parts one and two at the college, the first day I'd be in there, and that was usually a pretty big class. I might have had, I don't know, 50 or 60 people in there, maybe even more in those bigger classes. the first thing I would ask them is, how many of you want to be here today? Raise your hand. And I honestly, be honest, not a hand went up, not even mine. And I said, notice my hand didn't go up? And yet, here we are. How is that possible? We don't
Yeah.
want to be here. Why are we here?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to talk about. That's the story of history. All the things that happened that brings us here with industrialization, and you need to get an education. And, you know, you can't make sense of what you're doing if you don't understand history. And if you don't, and so the next thing I would say to them is, you could have gotten by without this information, and you're probably going to make more money than I'm going to make anyway as a teacher. But you'll have more choices if you understand these things. You'll have more opportunity to see if it fits you and what you want to do and what you need to be. And you're also going to see where, okay, I just got to go out there and work my butt off because that's the world, if I want these things. Some things will be you can't change and you got to live with them. And some things you got some wiggle room with how you understand and where you go with it. And you can appreciate other people and their journeys as well. See how important history is? And yet it's never taught that way. So I do the same thing with basketball, and you're exactly right. The interesting thing to me about basketball, I don't know if this is still true or not, but if you read a narrative about a basketball game, a high school basketball game in Indiana, Illinois, anywhere in the country from 1920 on, and you're just reading that narrative, it sounds like the same game. The excitement, the what's going on, the strategies and all things. You wouldn't know what decade you were in because the game in itself was always exciting, even though when you look back at those older games, you think, oh my gosh, what is this? But there's a force, there's a drama that always stays through it. I don't know if that's still true or not because we sensationalized it back in our day too, and jazzed it up because we were selling something. People were selling television stations, radio stations. They were selling something. So they wanted you to listen to the games, and that sparked it and jump started it too. So I don't know. Just some interesting thoughts about especially history and how important it is, even the history of basketball.
Well, you watch some of those old black and white games, the Milan of the 1950s and, the Crispus Attucks with Oscar Robertson of the 1950s. And you're reminded to your point, you're exactly right. It's natural, the hyperbole, the sensual, I mean, you said it, we make everything so dramatic, right? Just in a natural piece. But in the era of the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even in the 1970s, there was less to sensationalize around us than what there is today with social media. It just really, high school basketball games was the community event. It was the one thing that people had in many ways to get, to when they came in from 20 hours of working in the fields or the manufacturing plants. Now we've got thousands of channels to turn on TV. We've got social media in the moment, the second to touch base, and there's a lot more to sensationalize than what there once was.
Yes, and you've got to do that if you're going to sell that product. So that doesn't help either. You mentioned something that about, and we've been dancing around the changes. But one of the things I got interested in because I was watching that a tape of that Milan game, I got interested in how jump shots developed
Oh,
over time. In fact, I've written several blogs about that and went back and kind of tried to see where that started and how that started. But that last second shot by Plum was almost there with that
yeah,
reach, the extension of the
yeah.
reaching into the cookie jar, as my coach always said, reach into the cookie jar, keep that hand out there, where you're and if you want it to go arc, keep it up higher and bring it down if it's a long shot, so you could fine tune it. But it wasn't quite there yet, and yet it was getting ready. It got there pretty quick. He's still pushing it a little bit. So you notice things like that when you start looking at those films. But at some point, the jump shot has not changed. What's changed maybe is how much the body's into it, and the body was always into it because we're doing these 3-point shots.
Yeah.
But anyway, just a side item that became
Well,
fascinating to me.
I appreciate you and I thank you for all you do. And I look forward to catching up with you again in the very near future.
Okay, sounds great, Kevin. Let's do this again.
God bless you, my brother. I love you, and keep at it. And thank you all for joining Dr. Mills and I on this episode of Leadership Synergized. May your day be filled with love, God's grace, and guidance. Thank you.